Buenos tardes. Hey guys, thank you for coming. So we did something like, well, actually, I think at least half of you have been to a Snakes on the Lake presentation that I've done for the last, I don't know, years and years and years. This is going to be different from that. About half of this is going to be familiar content from that, but I'm going to start out with a pared down version of a conference talk that I do called Putting Snakebite on the Map. And this is going to be a discussion of snakebite around the world. And then I'm going to narrow it down and we'll talk about Central America and Costa Rica specifically. Okay, so around the world, there's some real inequities in how snakebite impacts populations. It's not distributed evenly. It happens, it happens to an extreme degree in some areas and not at all in other areas. But the outcomes don't have a lot to do with the snakes or with how many people are bitten. So this is going to be kind of a world tour, a region by region examination of what makes snakebite dangerous. Okay, essentially it's the who dies where and why talk. Okay, so around the world there's somewhere between 2 and 5 million bites. The official numbers are about 50 to 100, I think WHO says 128,000 deaths. It's probably a lot more than that. Obviously, those are big ranges. Those are big ranges because we don't have good data. There's huge regions of the world, like Africa, where we just don't know how bad the problem really is. To put that in context, you have about 500,000 deaths from malaria still, 1.5 from tuberculosis, another 1 million from HIV. And snakebite, you got somewhere between 2 and 5 million. So in terms of disease impact, it's on par with the diseases that we're a lot more familiar with. Okay, so what we're going to do in the first half of this talk is I'm going to go kind of region by region and look at what we can learn in each area. And what's really interesting is that there's some kind of natural experiments that emerge in each area that shed light on what makes snakebite dangerous or not that dangerous in different areas. I'm going to start over in Western Europe and then go to the US. We'll look at Australia and Papua New Guinea. Then we'll come back over to Central America. Then we'll look at India and Africa. Okay, so as we go through this, you don't have to save questions to the end. Ask any questions at any time. I'm going to try to crash through this in about 90 minutes, and I'll meter the questions to try to land us about on time. If we're getting to something, I'll say hold the question and we'll get to it. If not, I'll try to answer it on the spot. But feel free to ask, because once I leave a topic, I might not come back to it. Okay, let's start in Europe. We got about 700 million people. It's one of the larger population groups that we'll look at in this, 7,000 or 8,000 bites a year. Europe, for the most part, except for, back over here, Europe has one genus of venomous snakes, venomous that matters at all, a genus called Vipera. So Vipera berus is what you find all over here. They actually go all the way up into the Arctic Circle, up in Scandinavia. They bite 7,000 or 8,000 people a year. But Vipera are little snakes, and they're not especially dangerous. I don't want to discount them. Occasionally they deliver fatal bites, but it's occasionally. They're probably not even as dangerous as the copperheads that we would deal with in the US. And in the US, copperheads are the least dangerous of the venomous snakes in the US. In Europe, that's pretty much all they've got in the whole continent. If you go far east enough, you get some that are a little bit larger, a little bit more dangerous, but it's a tiny little sliver of Europe. So for the most part, it's not a big problem. They have between 1 and 7 fatalities a year. It's a handful. Okay, now in the US, let's look at, we got about half the population of Europe. Also have about 6,000 or 8,000 bites a year, about the same number of fatalities, but we have way, way, way worse snakes in the US. In particular, you've got eastern and western diamondbacks and timber rattlesnakes. Those are a whole different caliber of animal from the little Vipera in Europe. But still, you've got about the same number of bites, about the same number of bites in half the population, so there's more people per capita being bitten, about twice as many people being bitten per capita. US has a lot more rural landscape than Europe does. So we have more people being bitten, but there's still only 3 to 6 fatalities a year, and it's closer to 3 than 6 most years. Okay, so what we learned from this is the conflict, or the snakes and people occupying the same space. It correlates with bites, but it doesn't correlate very well with people dying. Okay, so what else might be going on? What about if we look at how toxic the snakes are? So Australia famously has some of the most toxic snakes in the world. In fact, Australia is the only country in the world where most of the snakes are venomous. A majority of the species are venomous. So they have about 500 bites a year that are treated, 2 or 3 bites a year that are fatal. So we have about the same number of bites, but Australia's only got 25 million people. And you don't have 6,000 or 8,000 bites, you have 500 bites. So let's look at the number of deaths per bite. So in the US, your chance of dying if you're bitten is between 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,500. It is, since the US doesn't count snakebite as a reportable condition, we don't really know, it is probably closer to 1 out of 2,000 bites are fatal. Snakebite is not generally a life-threatening thing in the US. But that's about 10 times the fatality rate in Australia. In a place that has similar socioeconomic conditions, it produces excellent anti-venom. And importantly, Australia knows how to treat snakebite. A lot of the US, it's not a common, it doesn't make up a significant part of a doctor's training to look at how snakebite is treated or how it should be treated. A lot of the information they work with is old, or they're just, they end up looking up stuff in the throes of an emergency because they've never been trained on it. So if you take a similarly developed country and you put the snakes that are extremely toxic, all other things being equal, you get about a 10-fold increase in fatalities per bite. Okay, so that's an interesting difference. So the toxicity is going to be a part of it. But if you go just north of Australia, they've got the same snakes. They've got taipans and death adders in particular. Those are two elapids. Elapids are the family of snakes that includes things like mambas and cobras and snakes that tend to be fairly dangerous. So Papua New Guinea has the same snakes. They've got half the population and they've got over 1,000 fatalities a year. So obviously there's something else going on. So toxicity is part of it, but it's not the whole story. There's something else happening. Okay. So we talk a lot about the toxicity of venom. Toxicity of venom it's important, but it's not important on its own. By itself, toxicity means nothing. Your body is 70% this. If I drank 4 or 5 of these in an hour, I'd probably die. It'll kill you. The dose makes the poison. So if we look at the dosage, this comparison's been really useful. So we look at European honeybees, or actually it applies pretty well to the Africanized bees here as well. Honeybees have a venom that is about on the same level as a Western diamondback rattlesnake in terms of toxicity. It's about the same level. You worry if you're not allergic to a bee, do you worry but if you get stung by one? Probably not. It's annoying, it hurts. It's meant to hurt. But it's not life-threatening, it's an annoyance. The difference is you're getting micrograms of venom here, you're getting microliters there. A yellow jacket wasp's venom is about the same range of toxicity as a gaboon viper. And we're going to see an unfortunate case of a gaboon viper later on. Harvester ants, you're going to seriously compare a harvester ant to a black mamba? It's not really a fair comparison because a harvester ant is 3 times as toxic as a black mamba. It's not even, a black mamba wishes it had. And a black mamba is one of the most toxic snakes in the world. Harvester ants is the same story. It's going to hurt. You're gonna be hating life for a little bit, but it's not, and if you're not allergic to it, it's not dangerous. Now, the one thing all these have in common, all of these are Hymenoptera. Wasps, bees, and hornets and ants are all Hymenoptera. They tend to produce fairly allergenic venom, so people are allergic to them. If you're allergic to them, that is a completely different situation, which I'm not really getting it into, but it's the same thing as with people who are allergic to peanuts or strawberries or shellfish or whatever. That can be immediately life-threatening for reasons that are not related very much to the venom itself. Okay, so dose is important. Here's another way to look at it. This hits home at the lake. So if I take a shot, so Anne, I give you a shot of vodka, okay? Please, yeah. I wish I had one to give you. So I can give you a shot of vodka. This is about 3 times the potency of wine, right? I can give you a shot of vodka. You're going to be fine. You're probably okay to drive. You're going to be totally functional. But if you drink 3 bottles of wine, you're probably going to die. You take a healthy adult, you drink three bottles of wine, you're probably going to die, unless you've got some tolerance, some serious tolerance. Yeah, so that's your body trying to keep you alive. So this is actually a pretty fair comparison of something like a coral snake, which has a very, very tiny amount of very toxic venom, or a terciopelo or a bushmaster that has a much less toxic venom, but a lot of it. If I had to choose to be bitten by something, of these examples, I would take a coral snake all day long. Coral snakes, nobody's ever died from a coral snake bite in Costa Rica. In the US, since anti-venom was introduced 50, 60 years ago, there's been 1 fatality in the US to a guy who chose not to get treated. He was bitten multiple times by a big coral snake. He was drunk, refused treatment, and he died. But this is actually a pretty accurate comparison of a small snake that's a lot more toxic versus a big snake that's less toxic. I would take a bite from a black mamba, which will routinely kill healthy adults in an hour or 2. I would take a bite from that over a bite from a terciopelo all day long. For one thing, the bite doesn't cause any tissue destruction, doesn't hurt that much. And if you've got anti-venom on hand, you can be bitten by a black mamba today and go home from the hospital tomorrow. It resolves very quickly. It's very much a pass-fail situation. But if you have anti-venom on hand, generally those resolve fairly quickly.
So question.
Yes.
You might get to it, but what about baby snakes versus?
I'm glad you said that, because I'm not going to touch on it otherwise. There's a common myth that goes around that baby snakes are more dangerous than adults. You can actually use this as a pretty good comparison, because in some species, some rattlesnakes, for example, including the rattlesnakes here in Costa Rica, baby snakes have a different composition of venom than the adults do. They eat different things. They eat different prey. And so their venom, that goes through an ontogenic change, goes through a change as they age, usually around 18 months or so, or about 18 months of age. Their venom shifts from one composition to another. So a baby snake could be quite a bit more toxic than an adult, but adults carrying 30 to 100 times more venom than a baby will. So if all of the things being equal, no, the bigger the snake, the worse the bite's going to be. Yeah, one of the myths is that the babies can't control the venom. Well, first of all, they can. They're born with that. That's not. They don't go to snake school and learn how to control their venom. They know how to. They come out of the egg or out of the mom, able to do that. But even if it were true, and even if they gave you all they have is not very much compared to an adult. Adult could give you 25% of what it has, and it's still going to be 10 or 20 times what a baby has if it gives you everything it's got.
That myth persists. Yeah.
Oh, it does. It does, and it comes up every time.
The thing about baby snakes don't know how to control their amount of venom. I said, we're talking a reptile brain here.
Yeah, that reptile. So that would be a whole other conversation. But for the most part, that brain runs on instinct. Okay, so let's come here to Central. Yes, ma'am.
So are the females, which are smaller, always less
fatal than the males?
Oh, that's super interesting. So in most species, females are a lot bigger than the males?
I mean, the other way around.
Yes, the other way around. Yes, the bigger the snake, regardless of its sex, the bigger the snake, the worse the potential bite is. It turns out, though, that testosterone in snakes as well influences their tendency to bite. So, and testosterone in humans tends to get people to do stupid things with snakes. So on both sides of that equation, testosterone makes snakes more dangerous because we tend to screw with them. We, meaning guys, tend to screw with them more than women do. And the male snakes tend to be more prone to agitation. Okay, so Central America. So if we look at the combination of the toxicity of the venom and how much it is, so that's, we're getting closer to something that is meaningful. So we look at throughout Central America, we've got about 5,500 bites a year. The big three, we'll talk on this more later, but we've got terciopellos, rattlesnakes, and bushmasters. Bushmasters don't bite many people because they live out in the primary forest, but rattlesnakes bite a good number of people. Terciopellos bite a lot of people, and we'll talk more about that. Here in Central America, the fatality rate's about 1 or 2%. So what was, remember, we went from 1 out of 2,000 in Europe, probably 1 out of 1,500 or so in the US, 1 out of 250 in Australia. In Central America, it's somewhere between 1 out of 50 and 1 out of 100 bites are fatal. So those bites are getting more and more fatal with less toxic snakes, but bigger snakes, snakes with more yield. So this is part of the story, but yes.
Is the reason that terciopellos bite so many just because there's so many?
There's so many of them. Yeah, so the last half of this, I'm going to talk about Central America specifically. We'll talk in detail about terciopellos. Terciopellos are a special, they're called the ultimate pit viper for a reason, but let's get into that. We'll table that.
I was going to
Yes.
say one thing. When it comes to the fatalities, yeah, I was reading where like usually not more than 6 or 7 people die a year in Costa Rica.
That's true.
And normally it's because they had extenuating circumstances, like maybe a heart problem, they had another problem. And so we're not talking healthy people that are dying.
Yeah, so there's usually, so snakebite is a complicated thing. Venoms are not, for the most part, most venoms are not simple. They don't do simple things. They usually are doing a combination of things. So if you get a large dose of venom in a person that is either very young or very old, very small, or otherwise in less than optimal health, or if there's a long delay in treatment, those are things that make those bites, that exacerbate the situation. So if a 200-pound guy is 25 years old and perfect health, gets bitten, and say, you know, me, I'm 56, I'm less than 200 pounds. I have some special exacerbating health issues. I'm a perfect storm. If I get bitten, it's a life-changing thing for me. So I'm going to have a different outcome than somebody else. Okay, so we've got the toxicity of the venom, we've got the quantity of the venom, but now we need to look at what the venom's doing, because venom, all of these venoms all do different things. Don't worry about the details of this. We have 3 big areas of toxins. Hemotoxins cause either coagulation or a lack of coagulation. Either you bleed like crazy or your blood turns to jello, which neither one of those things is good. You've got neurotoxins that either, usually they interfere with the neurotransmitters at a neuromuscular junction, so signals don't get to muscles, including the muscles that make you breathe. Cytotoxins, this is relevant to Costa Rica. Cytotoxins are things that destroy tissue. Terciopellos destroy tissue like nothing you've ever seen. Okay. So we look at, we have a really interesting thing here in Costa Rica, a comparison that I really like to make. We compare terciopellos and bushmasters. When somebody asks, and it inevitably comes up, well, what's the most dangerous snake in the world? Or what's the most dangerous snake in Costa Rica? That's a surprisingly hard question to answer. Is it dangerous to an individual or dangerous to a population? Because those are different, those have different answers. In terms of danger to a population, terciopellas are far and away more dangerous to the population. To individuals, a bushmaster is much more dangerous. Let's take a look at why that is. Okay, so terciopellas, who said that there's a lot, terciopellas are everywhere. There's lots and lots of them. I had one when I lived over there in Green Village. When we moved, we found, were you there when Kenneth found the terciopella in the washroom under the dryer?
I think that's the washing machine.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had one in the house. Actually, I had terciopellas in the house all the time, but I knew they were there and they were contained. Free-range terciopellas in the house, not okay. So for a snake that is very nervous, that's a very nervous, easily frightened snake. They have a reputation for being aggressive. That's not a good way to understand their behavior. It's easy to scare a terciopella. They're really nervous. But for a snake that's so nervous, they're perfectly happy to live around populated areas. They show up in yards and garages and dog houses and people houses and all kinds of things. They produce about 400 or 500 bites a year. So there's a lot of opportunity for them to do damage. But only about 1% of their bites are fatal. 99% of the time, those bites are survived. About 30% or so have long-term injury, either tissue damage or kidney damage or something like that. But in terms of just survival, about 99% of people bitten by terciopellas live. That's not the case with bushmasters. Now, bushmasters don't bite anybody. There's between 0 and 1 bite a year, usually. But that's a primary forest animal. They live far from people. They don't deal with stress. They don't deal with disturbed habitat. The problem is that if you get bit by a bushmaster in its territory, you're a long way from help. So that delay in treatment that I mentioned earlier becomes a real problem. And the mode of action, what that venom does is different. So terciopellas cause coagulopathy. They do horrific tissue damage. I'll show you a picture of that later. You're going to wish I didn't, but I'm going to. So bushmasters also do tissue damage. They also cause coagulopathy, but in fairly short order, they cause shock. They cause hypovolemic shock. Your blood pressure drops, you black out, and if you're out in the forest when that happens, you black out, and that's the last thing that happens to you.
They're more laid-back snakes.
They're a much more laid-back snake. So bushmasters, except when they're feeding, their feeding response is absolutely terrifying. A bushmaster in feeding mode, I would juggle terciopellas blindfolded before I want to tangle with bushmasters. But bushmasters, when they're not eating, people free handle them. I wouldn't do that. That's not smart. But they're generally gentle giants. Yeah. They're bigger than terciopellas. They have more venom than terciopellas, but they're generally less likely to give it to you unless they mistake you for food. I've been mistaken for food by a bushmaster, and it missed. Fortunately, catch me later. I'll tell you that story. It was kind of a shit show. But anyway. So now we've got not just the toxicity, but specifically what the venom does, how fast it does it, and how much venom there is. So now we're getting a more well-rounded picture of what makes the snake dangerous. Now, how does that play out in the real world? This is a map of Guinea in West Africa. The organization I work with, we have a clinic right there in Kindia. And now the red and yellow, these are coded by species of bites. So the reds and yellows are vipers, various vipers. And you notice that the red and yellow viper bites, they come to Kindia from all over the country. Now the blues and greens are mambas and cobras. You notice that they don't come from all over the country. Those are clustered around the clinic. Anybody want to take a guess at why that is?
The rest of them die.
The rest of them don't live long enough to get to the clinic.
Pretty much.
We're going to meet one of those in a little bit. Okay, so what the venom does and how fast it does it is, it's a better way to understand toxicity than just how many mice it'll kill.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Is the reason there's so many terciopellas, okay, I know that they can have up to 80 babies or something like that.
They have live babies, but yeah, but they have lots of them. There's a big difference. So bushmasters are the only pit viper in the Americas that lays eggs, and they'll typically lay 7 to 12 eggs.
That's why.
Yeah, and because they're habitat specialists. Terciopellos are habitat generalists. I mean, they're just as happy to live in the forest as they are in your garage. If there's food, they're happy, and they are prolific. If they're eating a lot, they're breeding a lot. They produce a lot of babies. Bushmasters have bigger babies, but a lot fewer of them.
7.
7 to 12, yeah, is kind of typical. Okay. So remember when we looked at the combination, the difference between Australia and Papua New Guinea? The biggest difference between those is not the snakes. They've got the same snakes. Habitat's a little bit different, but the biggest difference there is a socioeconomic situation. Australia is a first world, well-developed country. Papua New Guinea is decidedly not. It is one of the poorest countries in the world. And when we look at a few other countries in a similar socioeconomic situation, and you put some very dangerous snakes in there, things go completely off the rails. So India, 1.3, now it's probably about 1.4 billion people. I think as of a year or two ago, India is now the most populous country in the world. It's past China. But they also have some of the worst snakes in the world. They have cobras and kraits. They have saw-scale vipers. They have Russell's vipers. All of those are horrible. In India, that's what they call the Big Four. They probably have north of 1 million bites a year in the country. It's the worst impacted country in the world in terms of snakebite. There's about 50,000 bites a year there that we know of. There's a good chance that there's more than that. And the socioeconomic situation, their GDP per capita is about 4% of the US. It is wildly different. Okay, let's look at Africa. Africa is very similar, 1.1 billion people. It's spread out. It's a lot bigger it's about 9 times the size of India. Comparable population. It's even poorer than India, at least if you get sub-Saharan Africa, which is from about here down. It's a level of poverty that it's really hard to describe. And due to bad luck, they've also got some of the worst snakes in the world. They've got cobras and mambas and saw-scale vipers and puff adders and gaboon vipers and on and on and on. Okay, to put that in perspective, okay, we started out with 1 out of 2,000 bites being fatal, then 1 out of 1,500 in the US, 1 out of about 200 or 300 in Australia, 1 out of 150 here. In Africa, we see baseline fatality rates of people who make it to the clinic of between 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 4. So across the total population, that's not just a little bit worse than the US or Europe or Australia. It's 2,000 to 3,000 times as bad. Most people here don't know anybody who's been bitten by a venomous snake, let alone killed by one. Everybody in Africa knows people, friends or family, who have died from snake bite.
I was bitten by a
Everybody.
jumping pit viper.
I remember that, yeah. I've been bitten by lots of snakes, none of them very medically important. The only one that was really made me think I won't do that again. I got bitten by a snake here called a road garter. It's called guadacamino. It's a rear fang snake. They're not super dangerous, but they are, it's possible that a very large one that bit a sensitive person and chewed on them for a very long time could cause some real problems. It's the only rear fang snake here that I treat them like coral snakes. They're nasty. Okay, so we've got bites and poverty. Here's the point that I want to make. Bigger snakes is like throwing another log on the fire. More toxic snakes is like throwing a log on the fire. Poverty is like throwing gasoline on the fire. That is far and away the biggest determinant in how dangerous snake bite will be in any population.
Lack of education. Those people in the outback are just as prone to go to their shaman to get a cure.
That results in a delay of treatment.
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce you to some of our patients here. This is in Kindia. This is the clinic in Kindia. This young man came in. He was hunting for some rodents. I think it was a shrew or something in some piles of leaves. Plunged his hand into a pile of leaves, felt something stick his finger, and then went to healer after healer after healer. And so we don't know what bit him. A lot of vipers can cause the injury that he had, but it had been, I think, 28 days, 26, 28 days after the bite that he showed up at a real clinic to get real treatment. Well, after 28 days, the bite's done what it's going to do, and that's what it did. So it's called autoamputation in cytotoxic bites. It's super common. Terciopellos do this. You get anti-venom quickly. It helps prevent that. Okay, let's talk about mamba bites. Mamba bites are really special because they're totally unremarkable. You can barely see a couple of those are fang marks there. This woman, 27, 28 years old, this is also in Guinea, walking home from a funeral in tall grass, felt something bump her leg. Mamba bites are not painful, at least not initially. She arrived at the clinic 2 hours and 15 minutes after the bite. In the development of a mamba bite, 2 hours is a long time. She was tied to the driver of a motorbike for two hours and 15 minutes. Now, nobody ever saw the snake, but we know what bit her because it was a western green mamba. If you know the symptoms that a venom produces and you know the habitat where it happened, you can usually identify the snake, at least to a genus level, if not a species level. In this case, we're confident enough that it was a western green mamba. A black mamba would have presented the same way, except she wouldn't have made it to the clinic. Okay, so the droopy eyelids you see here, the sweating, the drooling, those are what distinguish a mamba, well, specifically the sweating and the drooling distinguish a mamba bite from a cobra bite. The drooping eyelids you get with any neurotoxic bite, and she didn't make it. Okay, this is Weibo. This is in Benin. This is in the northern part of Benin. So Weibo was bitten by a saw-scale viper about 7 o'clock in the morning. We got the call. We'd actually been filming at this hospital all day long. Got back to our hotel, dump the data off the cameras, recharge the batteries, change our clothes, take a shower, and get a knock on the door and say, we've got to go back. It's a bite and it's bad. So we get there, and this kid is, I should have had the picture of him in the hospital as we arrived, but he was, a naked 7-year-old kid laying in the hallway of a hospital, totally non-responsive, no stimuli. He was gone. Bites that are purely or predominantly hemotoxic, that's not talking about tissue destruction, it's just coagulopathy. You can be really far gone before you realize how far gone you are. And that was the case here. He had been to some healers, he had cuts made around the wound with some glass, he had some plant poultice put on it, they'll use goat dung, they'll do all kinds of horrible things that don't do anything but waste time. So we got the call, he'd been given 2 vials of anti-venom when we got there. His blood still was not coagulating. We brought some more anti-venom with it, gave it to him in the hopes that he would pull through. And this kid was totally non-responsive. After about 30 minutes of this antivenom, he started to scratch, that's a good sign. It's an allergic reaction. It's an immune reaction to the antivenom. But itching is a pretty good end-to-end test. It means he's feeling something and he's responding to it. So he's still in there. Next morning, he's right. Not quite like it almost never happened, but almost like it never happened. Next morning, he was fine. So we bought him probably another 60 years of life for the cost of dinner at Gingerbread. Okay, so that's Africa. Let's talk about Costa Rica. We've got 500 or 600 bites a year. Only about 1% of those bites are coral snakes. This is fatalities are rare. The truth is they don't happen. Nobody dies from coral snake bites here. For one thing, they don't bite very many people, but also coral snake bites they're slow to develop and they're relatively simple to treat. They take less antivenom to treat, and it is a treatment-friendly bite, if there's such a thing. Yeah, the fangs are tiny, the yield is tiny. I mean, they have a very toxic venom, but remember, it's just a little bit of it. So 98, 99% of the bites here are pit vipers, mostly terciopellos. 70, 80%, when I say bothrops are terciopellos. About 1% are fatal. Of the bites that are fatal, almost all of them are terciopellos. Hognose vipers don't kill anybody. Eyelash vipers almost never kill anybody. Bushmasters kill people when they bite them, but they don't bite anybody. Rattlesnakes will occasionally kill people, but fatal bites here happen from terciopellos, and that's the case throughout Latin America, or throughout Central America. Yeah. Okay, here in Costa Rica, here's where bites happen, and this is super interesting. So the darker and redder these are, the worse the snakebite problem is. We have a little hot spot south of the lake here. I think that's probably noise in the data. It's probably it's just a very small population. 1 or 2 incidents on the south side of the lake could skew that off. But notice that you have a big green area here. It's a low incidence of bite. And green up here. Does anybody have any idea what's going on there?
Yeah.
Okay, what's here?
That's the Central Valley.
That's the Central Valley.
So you're not talking about the poverty.
Well, so what happens in Central Valley? Central Valley is developed. You're not going to get bitten by a terciopello in the middle of San Jose. Okay, they do live in disturbed areas. They don't live in the middle of cities. They do show up in the outskirts of cities, but snakebites in that Central Valley where it's very heavily populated, very disturbed, very developed, lots of concrete. You don't have a lot of bites there. But that's different from here. So the Nicoya Peninsula is different. You don't have a lot of development there. What's going on there?
So dry, it's got more rats.
It's got rattlesnakes. What doesn't it have?
Yeah, food, people,
It doesn't have terciopellos. Terciopellos don't live here. Terciopellos live all over the place at low altitudes, mid-level altitudes, but they don't live where it's very, very dry. This is rattlesnakes. It's not terciopellos. And so that's the difference. So if you look at the range map of where terciopellos are common, that overlays perfectly with where bites happen. They're that closely correlated. Okay. This you might remember, but for the people who are new, I always want to use this because there's a couple of myths around identifying snakes. Okay, vertical pupils, what does it mean?
Nocturnal.
A snake is nocturnal. You're cheated, you've been here before, and you know. So the snake here on the top, that's a tree boa. They're totally non-venomous. They have some pretty respectable teeth, but they're totally non-venomous. That's a king cobra. Okay, what about head shape? What can you tell from head shape? Absolutely nothing. So the red ones are medically important. Red ones are venomous. The green ones are not. And I mean, look at that. And that's got a big head. That's got a big head. That's got a little small head. This is a rattlesnake. Our rattlesnakes here have relatively small heads. Here in the tropics, you just can't tell much from the size or shape of the head. Okay, and there's the snakes. That's those are not my sparkly fingernails, but that's a blunt-headed tree snake. It's an eyelash viper. That's a rattlesnake. You notice it has a fairly small head. It's a jumping viper. Rattlesnakes here too. The boa here, the boa's got a bigger head than the rattlesnake. This is a snail eater. When so these snail eaters, along with cat-eyed snakes do I have? Yeah, this one here. So this one and this one, these two guys, when they're disturbed, they tend to pull their head back. And when they do that, their jaws spread out a little bit and their head looks a little bit bigger and more triangular than it is. Head shape just means close to nothing here. Okay, let's talk about the specific snakes we have to deal with. Coral snakes. Forget this guy. This guy lives in a tiny little area of the Caribbean near Panama. You're never going to see it. These other three you are likely to see. Around the lake here, so from the west end of the lake all the way to the Caribbean Sea, Mycuros mosquitensis is Costa Rican coral snake. These are fairly common. The area where I lived out in Bella Vista, the last place I lived, we would go out and find 1 or 2 an hour. Super, super common snakes. If you get into the drier areas, I did find one at Green Village, so the far west end of the lake, and then Tiburon down. In the dry areas, you're going to find this species. This is Micrurus nigricinctus. This is a Central American coral snake. They look pretty similar. This guy doesn't look like a typical coral snake. This is multifasciatus. This shows up from the farthest west I have known of them occurring is around the hanging bridges, around the dam at the lake, and they go from there over to like El Castillo and then all the way to the Caribbean coast. People find these occasionally on the hikes at the hanging bridges. One thing to know about this guy, we don't have anti-venom for that, or that for that matter. These bicolored coral snakes, we don't have anti-venom for them, but they don't bite anybody. And it's not, don't pick them up, don't play with them. I did have somebody send me a picture holding this snake at the hanging bridges. It's like, what is this? That's an IQ test, is what that is. Okay, so we do have antivenom for the tricolored coral snakes. Okay, the rules you might have heard about what color sequence happens in coral snakes, that originated in the US. It sort of applies in the US. There's lots of exceptions to it. It does not apply anywhere in Latin America. You could argue maybe Chile. Chile doesn't have any coral snakes, but anywhere that coral snakes do occur, those patterns, they just don't matter because you have coral snakes that don't follow the typical pattern, and you have harmless snakes like this a neck-banded snake with the unfortunate name of Scaphiodontopas venestissimus that looks convincingly like a coral snake. And I can identify a coral snake from across the room. This is one that I'll spend a minute looking at it to make absolutely sure I know what it is before I pick it up. These do occur here around the lake. They're not as common as the other coral snakes. You also have a couple other things that happen in coral snakes. You have albinism, where the black pigment is missing. You have the reverse of that, melanism, where the black pigment becomes dominant, and they end up not looking like coral snakes. There was one case down in Lebanon, I know, of a Central American coral snake that had a condition called anerythrism, where the red pigment is missing. Very rare, but it happens. The takeaway here is don't rely on the color pattern here. It won't tell you what you need to know.
Why does it take you a minute to figure out?
Because before I touch anything, I want to be 110% sure I know what I'm putting my hands on. I'll put my hands on these. I won't put my hands on these.
But you said if you're here and you see one, a distance away from you,
Yeah.
you'll think about, what are you looking for here?
What am I looking for? There's a couple of tells. There are tells that are useful to me that aren't useful to people who don't spend decades looking at coral snakes from 4 inches away. So it's going to sound like a smart-ass answer, and I don't mean it that way. This doesn't look like a coral snake to me. This looks like what it is. It has a different head. The coloration around its head is different. The shape of its head is different. The placement of its eyes is different. The size of its eyes. Coral snakes have little tiny, tiny eyes. Colubrids like this have recognizably larger eyes that are placed farther back in their head. Coral snakes, like most elapids, their eyes are a little farther forward.
That's good.
The other thing you would notice, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you would recognize. There are interruptions in the pattern. There's also the red and yellow and black bands continue onto the tail, whereas in coral snakes, they do not. We can't see it. The red bands in the coral snakes here stop. In the tricolor coral snakes anyway, they stop at the tail. They go from red, black, and yellow, or red, black, and white to just black and white or black and yellow on the tail. The neck-banded snakes, the tricolor continues all the way down the tail. Also, in coral snakes, the pattern runs all the way around the body, including the belly. We have some other harmless snakes that's also true of. This guy, you flip it over, their belly's just white. Yeah, don't do that. That's not a good way to. Yeah. Okay. All right. Here's the one that always works. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
That always works. Just don't touch the snake. Okay, let's talk about pit vipers, because pit vipers are the ones that are important. Costa Rica, I mentioned we have the big three, the same big three that occur in the rest of Central America. We have the top two are terciopellos. What makes a pit viper a pit viper? It's that pit in between the nose, between the nostril and the eye, right about there. If I were a snake, you have these two pits. Those pits are heat sensitive and they tie into the snake's ocular system. So we guess that it probably, that their experience of it is probably becomes part of their vision. So there's a birth defect that happens in snakes. It's not that uncommon where they're born without eyes. But when pit vipers, like rattlesnakes or terciopellas, are born without eyes, they function just fine. You drop a mouse in front of them and they'll nail it just like they have eyes. Okay, down the hill in the dry area, we have rattlesnakes. The rattlesnakes here are fairly laid back for the most part. And then we have bushmasters. The rattlesnakes and bushmasters don't occur here around the lake. Around the lake, the only one of these, the only one of the big three we have at the lake are terciopellas. But we do have a couple of others. We have hognose vipers, super common. We have eyelash vipers, also super common. Hognose vipers, you're going to find them on the ground. They blend in, they don't move. They're fairly quick to bite if you disturb them, but they strike about that far and they're just not, it's really hard to get bitten by one unless you pick it up or stick your hand on a pile of leaves or something like that. Eyelash vipers are almost always up off the ground in bushes or trees. Almost never find them on the ground.
In the bushes.
Yeah, bushes. I mean, I've seen them way up in trees. They eat primarily lizards, sometimes birds. And then jumping vipers, those occur around the lake, but they occur at higher altitudes, like up above El Castillo, at the end of Mata de Caña, up where Bella Vista is. We occasionally get them up there. They have an astoundingly fast strike. It's almost like they move through space without covering the distance in between. They don't strike very far, but they're a short, fat little snake with all that muscle has nothing to move but itself. So when they strike that far, they tend to slide across the ground, which is why they're called jumping vipers. They don't literally jump off the ground, but it looks kind of like they do. Well, I don't know I've ever heard of anybody being bitten by a jumping viper except Gloria.
Yeah.
Where was, that was here around you're up the hill a little bit, right?
You know where my house is?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So they're not common at that altitude, but they happen. I do know of some findings up Guatuso Road as well. So they're around, but they're not super common.
And when I watched him, I know why they call them jumping pit vipers.
Because it's just
They're like
boom.
a coiled spring.
They are a coiled spring.
Really?
Yeah.
Just kept jumping. Like, that's what it reminded me.
That's a hognose viper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Near a house that we just finished building.
That's a pretty one.
It took me about a room.
Yeah. Elizabeth is really good at moving little snakes around. I appreciate that. So occasionally you'll hear stories of bushmasters being found around the lake. Bushmasters one of the species occurs up north, like around where Rio Celeste is, and then across the Caribbean slope.
I've never heard of one around.
Yeah, the one that Victor Casada had at his Serpentarium over in El Castillo was found as a juvenile up in Rio Celeste. They don't occur right here at the lake, but you'll occasionally hear that they do. You hear somebody found a bushmaster or a dog was bitten by a bushmaster. When that happens, it's a jumping viper. Their patterns look superficially similar. They're a very different snake, but their patterns look fairly similar. Okay, eyelash vipers are a special case. The only thing that all the eyelash vipers have in common is the eyelashes. They are the most variably colored snake in the country. This doesn't even begin to capture the variety. There's a population down by the dam that's striped. But it occurs in these color patterns, but they're striped instead of blotched. There was one I found down the road in El Castillo. It was yellow like this with a pink face. Occasionally they'll be all pink or orange, or I found there was a red one that came over here. These occur down in the South Pacific. That is a spectacular animal. Most of the ones, where are we now? We're Aguacate. So from here west, they're almost always this pink and green phase down here. As you go past if you go past like Nueva Arenal, Gingerbread, and farther that way, the color starts becoming a little more diverse again. But the point is, you're not going to identify eyelash vipers by color reliably.
I just found one a couple months ago, and all the ones I've seen are the same color pattern. But we found one right across the road here, and it was much more white on it than any of the others I'd ever seen.
Really?
Yeah, it had a lot of white and much bolder, brighter colors than any of the ones I'd seen here.
I would love to, if you see these things, send me pictures. I'm always eager to see pictures of them. Eyelash vipers are full of surprises. One of the surprises is how far they can reach because they're arboreal. And so when I used to keep ones that I found, and I would feed them house geckos because our house was littered with geckos. I'd drop out geckos in there and they would reliably strike a gecko behind the head from across the cage. They would flip upside down and backwards.
Oh, I need one of those.
And yeah. I wasn't always crazy about the free-range geckos in the house, but I'll take the geckos over free-range eyelash vipers in the house, I guess. Okay, let's talk about terciopellos. Terciopellos because people are afraid of them, because people hear of them. Everything's a terciopello. Every brown snake is a terciopello. Everything is, people find a blunt-headed tree snake or a cat-eyed snake or a boa, and all these, it must be a terciopello. Terciopellos have this pattern, this A-shaped triangular pattern, and you see it on the sides here. That's a reliable indicator. They're the only snake here that has it. There is a false terciopello that has something sort of like this, but it's still recognizably different.
Yeah.
And the false terciopellos are nowhere near as common as the real ones. Okay, they are also big snakes. These big females, so there's a 5-footer in the jar right there. This one that Dean has is, this was preserved. This originated here in Costa Rica. That snake died, it was 8 feet, 0 inches long.
Is this a false terciopello bait?
Probably, yeah. Probably. This is Erin and Graven at Clodomir picado with a big female. She's about 7 feet long. You get an idea why in the US, they don't knock snakes out to collect venom. In Latin America, they do. That's kind of why they do. That snake would be a nightmare to hang on to. Now, so she's about 7 feet long. Male terciopellos typically are not going to grow to much more than about 4, maybe 5 feet long, and they're quite a bit more slender. The size difference between the two is really remarkable.
Tails are longer.
Their tails are longer, and as babies, the
yellow tail.
yeah, the males have yellow and green tails. Females have red tails. As babies, that disappears as they age, but they're dimorphic in that way. Okay, I told you I was going to show you a picture. You wish I didn't. That's a terciopello bite. This is a guy named TV producer named Steve Rendell. They were filming a show here called Naked and Afraid.
I remember that.
It should have been Stupid and Unprepared. He stepped over a log and got popped without proper foot protection, got popped in the foot, and then did the worst thing he could do. He delayed treatment and went to the US for treatment. To do that with a venom that's actively digesting your body, bad idea. He had a bunch of skin grafts. They rebuilt his foot. But this is not uncommon. This is not an uncommon outcome.
Did he claim it was a bushmaster first before?
I don't remember him. I talked to him.
I don't think they knew what it was.
Yeah, I mean, from the area, the only thing that could have done that is a terciopello. I don't remember if they saw the snake or killed it or I don't remember. It was 10, 12 years ago that it happened, and I talked to him about a year after the bite. I don't know. Okay, so snakebite treatment, this is super easy. There's only one thing to do. You get to the hospital, you get anti-venom. I've got 2 anti-venoms here, one for coral snakes, one for pit vipers. Don't bring the snake, whatever you do. Don't bring it. They don't want it dead. They certainly don't want it alive. You don't need to do that. You don't need to kill the snake. Don't interact with it. If you can get a picture, great. It's not necessary because they're not going to treat. They'll treat the symptoms, not the snake. So you're going to present wildly different symptoms with a coral snake bite than a pit viper bite, and they'll be able to differentiate that. On top of that, most of the doctors will not be able to identify a snake based on the picture of it. Yes?
So can you tell us where in this area we can find the anti-venom?
The clinic right here in Nueva Arenal has it, in Nueva Arenal has it?
Just about
Oh,
all the
absolutely.
clinics have it.
Just about all, it's stocked everywhere. It's stocked,
Rio Pietras, would they have?
is there a clinic in, no, no, it would be in proper clinics. So one of the things,
May have to go to clinics because the clinic here will probably be closed.
if it's overnight, yeah, the clinic here, well, don't get bit at night, please, don't get bit at night. If you get bit at night, you're gonna end up in Cañas.
You go to Tiburon.
How about
They had it.
Tiburon definitely has it. Yeah.
24 hour, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, but what they will likely do is they'll drip and ship, which means get the anti-venom started, get you in there, and then put you down in Cañas or Liberia. Yeah. What's that again? Okay. Okay, so that's really all there is to know about snakebite. Don't cut and suck, don't apply electricity, don't put ice on it, don't do anything. Don't disturb the bite.
Find a shaman.
Get to a, don't find a shaman. Now there are some horrific things that are done in all areas of the world. I mentioned they're using goat turds for things. There was a woman in India, they were treated with cow dung. They actually buried her in cow dung and she died from that. Here, one of the common things that's done in veterinary, I mean, it's not veterinary medicine, it's a hack. People will inject dogs and livestock with kerosene. Has anybody heard this? You've heard this?
Yeah.
Kerosene.
Oh,
So now the poor animal has survived not one but two poisonings, and it does absolutely nothing to help it.
I've heard of use like Lysol.
I haven't heard Lysol of it. God, Lysol would. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. These poor dogs, what they survive is just is astounding.
They'll die from the treatment.
Now, one of the gringos here told me, well, I'll trust the local wisdom. They've lived here forever. They don't know any more about treating local snake bites than a farmer in Alabama knows about cottonmouth bites. It's just living here doesn't impart any wisdom or knowledge around treating snake bites. Yes,
When
ma'am.
you say clinics, you mean public clinics?
I mean, a public clinic, a private clinic can do it?
Until around,
No.
public. and government.
Yeah, a real clinic. And there's enough that are close by. If you're bitten in the daytime, go to Arenal.
In our houses.
It's in Arenal, if you go down like the main street from the gas station, you go down there and the first corner where you can turn left, right where the park and the church are, it's right there.
Oh, it's right there.
Where you live, bad idea, go to Tiburon.
Only during the daytime.
Yeah, if you're at this end of the lake, if it's equidistant, go to Tiburon because if you need more advanced care, you're headed in the right direction for advanced care.
And if your pet is bit, can you take your pet to it? No.
No, you take them to a vet. Vets are hard to get after hours.
Yeah.
And they usually do. They usually do, yeah. But getting emergency care for vets after hours is really tricky. That's a problem because a lot of animals are bitten at night because these are mostly nocturnal snakes.
There is a local co-op that you can join. I can't remember the details anymore. You can talk to Doris Luby about it. You contribute, and if you have a dog or cat or animal that needs the antivenom, you call, you can go pick it up and take it to the vet with you. And they'll then administer it, then you replace the antivenom later.
Oh.
So you can talk to Doris about that.
Yeah.
It's always an injection.
It is always an injection. Yeah, there's unfortunately not yet, although there's some interesting things happening, there's not yet any oral treatment for snake bites. It's always IV. In fact, it's not even intramuscular. You have to be able to place an IV. Yeah, you have to be able to place an IV, and most of us can't do that. Okay, but here you're never going to need that because I'm going to absolutely guarantee that everybody in here is never going to be bitten by a snake. Everybody who is bitten by a snake has one thing in common, is that they got close enough to be bitten. Being close enough to be bitten usually involves one of two things. You're either messing with the snake, trying to catch it or kill it. Don't do that. Or more commonly, about 2/3 of the bites, here it's much more than that. People are bitten when they don't watch where they put their hands or their feet. They reach into something where they can't see, they step over a log, a snake is very well camouflaged, they go to push a bush out of their way and they get an eyelash viper that tags them in the hand. Don't, just always, always, always watch where you put your hands and feet. If you go out at night, you know, how many people, I'm looking for sandals, barefoot, sandals, 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 you're all gonna get bitten. No, you're gonna get, no. If you were to walk in tall grass, a 4 or 5 foot terciopella can vanish into 4-inch grass. It's absolutely amazing. Don't walk in tall grass and flip-flops. In fact, even in the grass out here, if I were gonna walk in that grass, I would have boots on and preferably more. And I walk like this, just because I like to see where my feet go. This picture, this is a little rattlesnake. That's my friend Kim. There's actually 2 different pictures there composited together to make a point. I didn't actually have her put her hands that close to a rattlesnake. Don't, just watch where you put your hands and feet, and don't touch them. That's a little speckled rattlesnake, yeah. Yeah, they're not very big. Okay, that's the end of today's presentation. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I think we might be running ahead enough of schedule that if there's any other questions, I'm happy to do it. You 2 guys first. Fight it out. Okay, you first.
You talked about allergic reactions, and you said it's not insects. Did I hear you correctly? It's
Oh, no, so the allergic reactions that happen in like insect stings, it is, it's common in Hymenoptera venoms. So bees, wasps, ants, those are pretty allergenic venoms. So if you've been stung before, the next time you get stung, your body wakes up and goes, "Ah," and it tends to, it can, some people overreact. And so when you hear people having dangerous reactions to a simple bee sting, that's what's happening. It's the venom precipitates the reaction, but them dying or going into shock over it, that's an immune response. It's different from the venom. And people will die from, venoms are pretty allergenic things because they're big molecules, they're easy, for the most part, they're easy for your immune system to pick up on. So if you've had exposure to a venom before, the next time you're exposed to it, you can have an exaggerated reaction. And I do know of a few people, one friend of a friend was bitten by a pygmy rattlesnake. And pygmy rattlesnakes that big, they don't kill people. He didn't make it out of the snake room. Another friend of mine was bitten by a little Asian pit viper snake it's respectively venomous, but it doesn't kill people. His snake room was in the basement of his house. He didn't make it up the stairs. Allergic responses are quick. They're minutes. It's really, really fast.
exacerbate the complications from the bite. Then can you just take some Benadryl to help things along? Or is
In the event of an allergic reaction, now I am really averse to giving medical advice at all, but Benadryl will help mitigate an allergic reaction. It will do nothing for the effects of the venom. In fact, it's counterindicated for the venom. Vets will often they'll give antibiotics and Benadryl for bites to pets. Neither of those do any good at all. You don't need antibiotics. Snake bites are usually pretty close to sterile. The risk of infection, primary infection, is not very high in snake bites. And the Benadryl does nothing at all for you. If it's an allergic reaction, that's a different clinical event. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get Ann first and then, okay. Sorry.
I was just curious because Costa Rica has 2 anti-venom.
Yeah.
What about Africa? The hugeness of masses and all that.
Africa's hurting. So there is an antivenom here called Equitab, which is also produced by Clodomyra picado. It's for soft-scale vipers that's used in Africa. There's some European antivenoms that are used there. When our group uses mostly antivenoms from a company called Inosan in Mexico, they produce a fantastic antivenom. The antivenom that saved that boy's life was from Mexico. They produce a fantastic
So there's
antivenom.
quite a few different types of venom or just manufactured?
There's different manufacturers, and they each manufacture different kinds. So the 2 antivenoms here are both made from. Actually, the coral snake antivenom is what we call a monovalent. It's made only from the venom of Micrurus nigricinctus. it cross-reacts enough that it covers things like Mycorrhiza alleni or Mosquitensis or Clarkii. It doesn't work on the bicolored coral snakes. Multifasciatus or Nepartitis doesn't work on those at all. Their venoms are too different. The pit viper antivenom is made of a cocktail of Pacific terciopellas, Caribbean terciopellas, their venoms are a little bit different, rattlesnakes, and one of the two species of bushmasters. And with those venoms, you get enough cross-reaction that it helps cover jumping vipers or eyelash vipers or hognose vipers or anything else you might. It mitigates those enough that you're going to be okay.
Must be real confusing.
That's the good.
Yeah, I mean, in places like, so in South Africa, there's an organization called CIMER that produces a polyvalent that covers both elapids and vipers. It's because for one thing, having multiple antivenoms just makes the process more complicated. If you just have one drug, it's simpler. It is not as effective because you have less of each group of antibodies. So you tend to have to give more of it, but it's less complicated. So it's a trade-off. In Africa, you've got these polyvalents that cover multiple species. You've got the Ecotab, which covers one genus. You've got a monovalent for boomslangs, which is it's a colubrid, this family of mostly harmless snakes, except for boomslangs are super, super toxic. There's a monovalent that covers only that one snake. But yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated and messy. And yes, sir.
Okay. When they're producing the antivenom, how do they do that? Because the old system was to use horses.
Yes.
to get the
Still
serum.
use horses.
Okay,
It's-
and that created
Yeah.
the anaphylactic shock in many people. So
Yeah.
that was the big, for us,
25
keeping that was actually not an issue. It was a big issue because you didn't want to actually kill the person with the antivenom.
Yes.
And you'd probably get away with the snake.
Do a
Just treating it
sensitivity
correctly.
test.
Yeah.
How do they do this here now? They changed that system?
No. So if you ask me that question 10 years from now, I'm going to have a more interesting answer because there's some super cool things happening that don't involve growing antibodies in horses or sheep. But today, it looks a lot like it did 100 years ago. They're growing antibodies in horses and sheep. But what causes that immune response? Okay, so quick biochem. You've got this Y-shaped immunoglobulin molecule, an IgG molecule. These Y-shaped parts, the ends of those bind to the toxins. This tail on it, the stem of the Y, is what they call the FC chain. That is what sets off your immune response and says, your body looks at that and goes, this is horse or this is sheep, I don't want this in me. Modern antivenoms that are produced in Mexico, Australia, US, and Europe are what we call Fab antivenoms. And what that means is that Y-shaped molecule is broken up. It's broken so that either it's clipped at one of 2 points. If it's clipped at one point, you get the V-shaped top. That's called a Fab2. So the FC chain that sets off that immune response is gone. Much, much, much safer antivenom. In the US, they produce what's called, actually, the V-shape is called a Fab2. Then there's the antivenom they make in the US, Crofab, is called a Fab, where instead of, you break it into 3 parts. So you got this piece and the FC you throw away. Yeah, so the Crofab, which is this Fab product, it works fine, but because it's a smaller molecule, it clears the body very quickly. So you end up having to give it more over a longer period of time. The Fab2 that they have that they make in Mexico and in Europe and in Australia, that is a really safe antivenom. In fact, the boy that was there, typically you're giving antivenom in an IV, slowly and watching. That's not what we do in Africa. It's put in a syringe and you get it into a vein and it's done over about 5-10 minutes. It's a slow push, but it's much quicker than you would see. And we can do that there because the antivenom we're using doesn't have that FC chain.
So they don't put it in an IV bag, which is connected.
They put it in a syringe in the arm. Really. Yeah, it's the first time I saw that happen, I was quite alarmed. I was quite alarmed. It was,
Dramatic.
yeah, but the kid woke up the next morning
Wow.
and it saved his life. Yeah, he was fantastic. I'm sorry, there's a question over here. Somebody, did I already get it? Okay. Yes, no, go ahead.
When we moved to this area from the southern Guanacaste, they didn't have much to worry about. We have rugged terrain, and so we actually got gators that
Good.
snake bite. I mean, those are good. I mean,
Absolutely.
maybe they can jump like way higher.
So that 7-foot bothrops you saw can absolutely bite you in the thigh from the ground, but that's a big snake, you're probably gonna see it. Any barrier you put between you and a snake is gonna help.
Better than nothing.
So I would not be, hognose viper might get through these shoes, but any kind of barrier is going to make the bite less effective. It's not going to engage as well. It might mean the difference between getting one fang instead of two. It might mean the difference between getting very shallow.
Snake proof.
Oh, if you've got gators, nothing's here going to get bite. In
I
fact,
didn't know if maybe they go up higher and that'd be a jump.
we don't see bites on thighs here. I mean, it can happen. It's theoretically possible, but bites happen from here down
Okay, though.
and from here out. That's where people get bitten. Yeah, that's where people get bitten.
That's your rock line. It happens right here.
Yeah, there are people that get bit in the face. There's a couple of ways that happens. People will walk through bushes and they'll get an eyelash viper in the face or something. Or stupid people are playing with them and they're doing, you wouldn't believe how often that happens with reckless keepers. Yes?
I've been waiting to speak for 3 years. I've missed out.
Oh.
So, when you visited last time, I think you posted on Facebook that you found some of the snakes just the place you were staying.
Oh,
How
yeah.
is it that you're able to find, not that I want to go looking for snakes, but how is it that you're able to find snakes?
I go out at night and I'm looking for them. If you were walking around here, you are probably never more than 50 feet from the snake. I mean, they're everywhere. They're literally everywhere.
So how do you know how to go to find them? You just do it at night?
I go out at night. I go out at night with a light and I'm looking for them. So I'm looking mostly on the ground, but then up on fences and bushes, and so that's one way I find them. There's also a few roads that I know. There's a road. There used to be a road. I think it washed out in a storm, but there used to be a road from Tierras Morenas down to Cañas. It was an unpaved farm road. You could drive down that road at night and find rattlesnakes and lyre snakes and boas and blunt-headed tree snakes and centipede eaters and find all kinds of stuff down there. So road cruising and walking are the two ways I do it, but always at night. Going and looking for snakes during the daytime is harder. There's fewer species that are active during the daytime, and the ones that are active during the daytime tend to be pretty fast. They're hard to catch.
Another question is that when people post on Facebook and, oh, I see this green snake and that's very poisonous. I mean, really, none of them are. It's the Turkey color.
So if it is solid green here around the lake, it's nothing to worry about. We do have a green. There's a green palm viper. It's up at a higher altitude. We don't have those around the lake. That is mostly solid green. But the snakes you find here that are solid green are, for the most part, they are parrot snakes.
Very skinny.
Yeah, they're slender. They're long, slender snakes. There's a whip snake called Coronius exilitis, but you don't find those very often. That's all green. What else? We have vine snakes. We have 2 vine snakes here that are green. But that's a very distinctive look. I mean, they've got this weird pointy kind of bullet-shaped head. But if it's solid green here at the lake, it's almost certainly nothing to worry about.
But it doesn't sound like many of them. It doesn't sound like any of them.
Most of the species here are harmless. We have 4 pit vipers, and depending on where you are, 1 or 2, maybe 3 coral snakes. So we've got, I think my species count is 44, 45 species that I found here on the lake. And we've got 4 pit vipers and 3 coral snakes. So 7 of them are anything to worry about. 7 out of 40 or 50 species around the lake. Now that statistic can be used in a misleading way. in that people will tell you, oh, well, most snakes are non-venomous. Well, most species are non-venomous, but some of the venomous species are really abundant. So yeah, out in Bella Vista, the most common snake I would find were coffee snakes, which are nothing to worry about. But the second most common snake that I would find all the time were coral snakes. In a lot of areas, the most common snake you might find could be terciopellos or hognose vipers. So jumping vipers are much less common, but the other three are, that's a common snake. So when people say most snakes are non-venomous, most species are non-venomous. Most individuals, it kind of depends. Kind of depends. Okay, I think we're probably, okay, one more and then let's wrap it up.
She needs to buy a snake book where she goes home. And
Yeah.
what do you recommend now?
There's a really good, so there's two books. So Gloria has one. You still publish a, okay.
I have a book that I wrote, basically for the layperson, the person who doesn't want to be a herpetologist. And it's basically what to do if you're bitten, how to recognize the ones in our area. You don't want to know every snake in all of Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So I'll concentrate on our area. I may have a book or two in the car.
Okay.
And then what do you recommend?
What I recommend, if you want a really good field guide, there was one published, when did Tuan publish his book? 4 years ago? 5 years ago? There's a book called The Reptiles of Costa Rica by Tuan Leenders. Tuan Leenders, yeah, he's Dutch. He's a Dutch biologist. That is the newest field guide. He has two books. One's The Amphibians of Costa Rica, one's The Reptiles of Costa Rica. But The Reptiles of Costa Rica is an outstanding field guide. It's really, really good.
I wrote the book basically, just so you learn to recognize the venomous species.
Yeah.
That is the easiest thing for your head, is recognize the few that we have here. And if it's not one of those, don't worry about it.
Yeah. And even if it is one of those, so what I used to do this in all the classes, I would have everybody hold their arms out like this.
Yeah.
If you're that far from any snake in the country, you could be that far from a bushmaster and you are absolutely safe. If you're,
And you're going the opposite direction.
yeah, I mean, your distance, remember, to get bitten, you have to be close enough to be bitten. If you're that far away, you can see it, you can take pictures of it. They're not going to come after you. Now, I have had cases where I was like filming a terciopello where I'm sitting down on the ground and, they get curious, or I happen to be where she wanted to go. And so they're heading toward me, but it's not about me. They're headed somewhere else. I'm just in the way. They're not coming to me. I've had one picture of me you might see as me on the ground with a timber rattlesnake, and I had to keep backing up the camera, because the thing just was kind of like, what is, it was just curious about the camera. But no, there's no snake here that's going to pursue you. Snakes don't chase people. They don't. Yeah. There's some wild stories. Yeah, I mean, generally, if you don't hear it from a herpetologist, it's probably nonsense. That's a.
You don't fall in your boat.
No, the cottonmouths falling into boats. Well, so no, I mean, yeah. So any snakes can swim, but we don't have any snakes in the area, I don't think, that are predominantly aquatic. So terciopellos can swim just fine. But if I were in the lake, especially at that end of the lake, back when we had that crocodile that hung out over in San Luis, I wouldn't get in the water with a crocodile. Caimans I don't worry about, but crocodiles I wouldn't get in the water with. No, we don't have anything in the lake I worry too much about. Okay. One last question.
Has anyone ever died from the administration of anti-venom?
Oh,
And
thank you.
If there is a death, can you identify whether it was the venom?
Oh, the anti-venom. Yeah, the cause of death would be different. Okay, so to answer your question, have people died from antivenom? Back in the day when all we had was the whole IgG antivenoms, which happens to be the antivenoms here in Costa Rica. They are whole IgG antivenoms. They do cause a condition called serum sickness.
What's it?
Serum sickness? Serum sickness, so serum like your blood. They cause serum sickness that usually kicks in a week and a half after administration, but you can also have an acute reaction that happens in the first few minutes. that can be life-threatening. But, so I'm prone to allergy. I'm allergic to horses. I'm a perfect storm for snakebite.
Perfect job for you.
Fill it, but if I get bitten, I want as much antivenom as they can give me, as fast as they can give it. If I have an allergic reaction to the antivenom, they know how to deal with that. An anaphylactic reaction is something that they're rehearsed at. They're better at that than they are at snakebite. So load me up with antivenom. If I go into anaphylaxis, I'm going to trust that they'll deal with that. They can keep me breathing. They can keep my blood pressure up. That's a routine. It's dangerous, but it's a routine thing to manage. Now it has happened that people have died from antivenom. I don't know of any cases like that in Costa Rica. I do know of cases in the US with the old antivenom from 20 plus years ago, where occasionally somebody would die. That doesn't happen with the Fab and Fab 2 antivenoms.
It's easy to identify what caused it.
If somebody were to die from an allergic reaction, yeah, it would be recognizably different.
The best thing is if you already know you're allergic to horse and horse products and you have been bitten, let them know that immediately. And they'll have a respiratory team standing by.
Yeah, they should have it anyway. They should have it because it's, yeah, they should have it anyway. Okay, thank you guys so much for coming. Like I said, you need this?
Yeah, just for a second. So I want to thank everybody for coming and thank Ray again. And one thing that he's not going to mention, but I will, is that the organizations he works with are identifying the places where people are suffering from this public health catastrophe of untreated or poorly treated snake bite. And they are doing something about it. They are producing antivenoms. They're going to West Africa. They're going to different places where people are not getting the help and support they need, and providing training and providing resources and providing antivenom. And I think that's a really remarkable thing. So let's give him, as a representative of those organizations, another round of applause.